All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of virtual sessions for the Illinois Environmental Health Association. My name is Arne Burns, and I'll be the host for the morning and afternoon sessions for today. Our first speaker today is going to be Lauren Galloway. She'll be talking to us about ADA and service animals, specifically within restaurants. So Lauren, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Arne, and it's so good to be with all of you bright and early this morning. And I'm so excited to be talking to you about this really important topic and about service animals in the restaurant context, especially because in my line of work, we often get questions about this issue. And there's still, I think, a lot of misunderstandings about what the legal obligations of restaurants are and best practices in this area. So I'm really excited to take a little bit of a deep dive and have a great conversation today. Before I go ahead and get started and share my screen, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's access needs were being met. And there's nothing that I can do to improve access for anybody or ensure you can fully participate in the program today. All right, wonderful. Well, then I will go ahead and, like I said, just give me a second to share my screen here, and then we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so as I briefly mentioned there, I'm really going to be talking about today about service animals and the laws, specifically the ADA, that sort of regulate service animals in restaurants and how to best welcome customers with disabilities. And just to sort of give you a little bit of an introduction as to where I'm coming from on this issue and why I'm speaking on this issue. I am a staff attorney with an organization called Equip for Equality. And Equip for Equality is the protection and advocacy system for the state of Illinois. And there's a P&A like ours in every state. And we receive federal funding to provide free legal assistance to people with disabilities on issues related to their disability. And then within Equip for Equality, we also have a program that I manage called the Illinois ADA Project. And the Illinois ADA Project is a program that provides free technical assistance, information, and resources to the public about what the ADA and other disability rights laws, what they say, what their obligations are, things of that nature. So we receive technical assistance calls from people with disabilities, but also business owners and government entities and interested members of the public who just want clarity on what their obligations are or might be under the ADA. So if after today's presentation, if you have additional questions about service animals or other disability related issues, definitely feel free to reach out to us. I've included the number for the Illinois ADA Project below, and we would love to hear from you in chat if you had a question that we might be able to help with. And then before we kind of jump into things, I wanted to give us a little bit of a rundown of where we're going and what I was hoping to talk about today. So starting off, I just wanted to sort of set the stage, lay the groundwork a little bit, and reiterate the importance of welcoming customers with disabilities and customers who use service animals, and the value in that beyond the conversation about legal compliance. or legal requirements. And then go into a little bit more detail about what laws are we talking about, what specifically makes up the legal landscape when we're talking about service animal issues. So the ADA, but also state and local anti-discrimination laws that provide similar protections. And then sort of diving a little deeper into the provisions of the law, what parts of the law specifically pertain to allowing people with disabilities to frequent businesses, and particularly as relevant here, restaurants with service animals. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about the reasonable modification provision of laws like the ADA specifically. And then get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what is a service animal, what is sort of the breadth of what kind of animal qualifies as a service animal, and what tasks they might perform for a person with a disability, what rules apply to service animals in restaurants, as well as just thinking about best practices when you have customers who use service animals. How do you continue to welcome those customers? As I mentioned, I just wanted to briefly just talk about the fact that beyond any legal requirement or adhering to legal compliance or legal standards under laws like the ADA, welcoming customers with disabilities and with service animals just makes really good business sense. Because people with disabilities at this point make up about 20% of the US population. And because of the reality of the fact that there are still so many barriers in place for access for people with disabilities, when people with disabilities find a restaurant or a store that provides that access and prioritizes access and welcoming customers with disabilities, studies show they become repeat customers. So just thinking about that component, that piece of things as well, beyond any sort of conversation about legal compliance, thinking about these issues and being proactive and active in welcoming customers with disabilities makes good business sense. And as I mentioned, I kind of just wanted to start off by giving us a little bit of a lay of the land as to what laws we're talking about here, what laws are kind of relevant when we're in the service animal context. So the one that most people are at least generally aware of is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law that prohibits discrimination and provides equal opportunity for people with disabilities in many different areas of life. And the ADA has 5 different sections that are called titles and that address those different spaces, areas of life. And the one we're going to be predominantly talking about today is Title III of the ADA, because Title III is the section of the ADA that covers and provides the obligations of what are called places of public accommodation, or places where the public goes for services, goods or services. Places like private businesses would fall under Title III. So that's predominantly what we're going to be talking about today when we talk about restaurants. And then, like I said, I just wanted to flag that in addition to the federal law that most people are aware of, there are also state and local laws in place that provide similar protections to the ADA. So the Illinois Human Rights Ordinance, Chicago Human Relations Ordinance, Cook County Human Rights Ordinance, those are just a few examples, but just to keep in mind that in addition to that federal law, there are various state laws that also inform service animal related issues. And then, as I mentioned, in addition to kind of flagging that general legal framework, I wanted to pull out the provisions of the ADA and the parts of the ADA that really apply when we're talking about service animals in the restaurant context. So this is kind of a general focus of the ADA is kind of this anti-discrimination mandate. And under Title III, the general rule is that places of public accommodation are prevented from discriminating against individuals with a disability in their full and equal enjoyment of goods, services, facilities, privileges, or accommodations offered by that place of public accommodation. And as I mentioned, the provision of the ADA and of Title III that we're really thinking about when we're thinking about protections for people with disabilities in relation to use of a service animal, we're thinking about the reasonable modification mandate that exists in Title III. And what it says, what Title III says is that businesses must modify policies, practices, and procedures when necessary to ensure that people with disabilities can have that full and equal enjoyment of the goods and services offered by a place of public accommodation. And they are required to do so unless doing so would fundamentally alter the nature of the business. But that fundamental alteration standard is a very high bar and very, very rarely applies. But in terms of thinking about reasonable modification in the context of service animals in restaurants, the idea is that when you are welcoming service animals into a restaurant, you are modifying, if there's a no pet policy in place, you're modifying that policy to ensure that people with disabilities can fully and equally enjoy and access the services and the goods that a restaurant is providing. And then I was talking a little bit with Arnie before this presentation that I do have a number of different hypotheticals in here, and I like some audience participation. And I really wanted to, there's some questions in here about sort of designed to give us a better idea of what is a service animal, what type of animal constitutes a service animal, and kind of to help us realize, the breadth of services that a service animal can provide for people. So the first one I had is Alice is blind. She has a dog that helps her with navigation. Is Alice's dog a service animal? So do we have thoughts on that one?
In the room, we say yes.
And you would be correct. And I think this is the typical, picture that comes into people's heads when they think about a service animal, is an animal assisting someone who is blind. The next one, Bill uses a wheelchair. He has a dog that helps him open doors and carry objects. Is Bill's dog a service animal?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And this is another.
That is a service animal.
Definitely. And you guys are right on the money there. And again, think this is a relatively common understanding for people in terms of people with those obvious mobility disabilities using a service animal to assist them with the tasks as detailed here. Now, given, as I said, you're both of those would qualify as service animals, and I want to take a second to just go into more detail as to what specifically the definition is for a service animal under the ADA. And under the ADA's regulations say that service animals are any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability. And that can include a physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. And I think often there's misunderstandings about the breadth of the number of disabilities and disabled people that can use service animals to create access and independence for themselves. And that's a little bit of what I want to talk about a little bit further, is teasing out that, you know, service animals are not just those typical ideas that often people will have about, you know, only blind people using service animals, or only people with visible mobility impairments, because we still so often in the work that I do will run into that misconception and that very limited idea of what constitutes a service animal and who can use a service animal. And the ADA regulations also specify that the work or task performed by a service animal must be directly related to an individual's disability. Just flagging here that this is a relatively new definition. The Department of Justice updated its regulations in, I believe, 2010. It used to be a broader definition, but now service animals must, like the definition references, be a dog, or there are, and we'll talk about this later, exceptions for miniature horses. Okay, and given that I just referenced, you know, really trying to make sure we're thinking broadly in terms of who can benefit and who can use a service animal, I have another hypothetical for you all. So Dennis has bipolar disorder. Sometimes he cannot remember to take his medication. Dennis trained his dog to alert him to the fact that he needs to take his medication. Is Dennis's dog a service animal? Do we have thoughts on that one? And if not, I can go ahead and just answer too.
We're saying leaning towards no.
And that, see, and this is where I think the misconception comes in, because Dennis's dog would constitute a service animal because number one, it is a dog, and Dennis's dog has been trained to alert him to take his medication. So he's been trained to perform that task for Dennis. So he does meet that definition. And it might, I'm not sure where the hang-up was for you all, or the uncertainty there, but sometimes people will be unsure when the individual with a disability has trained the dog themselves. But the Department of Justice hasn't promulgated or made any requirements with regard to a specific certification process or how the dog needs to be trained, just that it needs to be trained to perform that work or task for individuals with disabilities. And many people with disabilities are able to successfully train their service animals to perform that work or tasks for them. I want to, and this might also have been is often a little bit of the confusion. I want to juxtapose that last hypothetical to this one. So Ernie has depression. He cannot leave his home without his dog because his dog gives him great comfort and happiness. Is Ernie's dog a service animal?
No.
Yes, you are correct on that one. And I just, like I said, want to juxtapose the difference here, because Ernie's dog is a dog, so he meets that prong of the definition. But it says here that he gives him great comfort and happiness, but it doesn't sound like he's been trained to perform an individual or specific task. So that would be where the difference would be here. And I think Ernie's dog would qualify as an emotional support animal, but not as a service animal. And under the ADA does not provide protections for emotional support animals, but only those service animals who have been trained to perform those individual tasks or that specific work for an individual with a disability. Okay, and this is the last one I think I have here, but just a quick one. Fran has a spinal cord injury. She had her pig trained to retrieve items for her. Is Fran's pig a service animal?
No, it's not a dog or a miniature horse.
Exactly, Lisa, exactly. Perfect. You guys are right on the money. And I just have the definition one more time here, but as Lisa just mentioned, a service animal needs to be a dog or that exception for miniature horses that we'll talk about a little bit later. And it needs to be individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of the individual with disabilities. And I've also included here some examples of what that those work or tasks might look like, just to again make sure we're on the same page in terms of how broad the assistance service animals can provide for people, how broad that can be. So examples of work or tasks that could that a service animal could help an individual with a disability with include pulling a wheelchair, alerting to sounds if somebody is deaf, alerting an individual with a disability to the presence of allergens if they have allergies, or detecting interrupting things like anxiety attacks or impulsive behavior if somebody has a mental health disability. Okay, so now we kind of have a sense of what the definition, what a service animal is, what is the definition. Now I want to get a little bit more into how does this apply in the public accommodation restaurant context? What rules should you be aware of with regard to providing service to people with disabilities who use service animals? So where can service animals go within a place of public accommodation? And typically, service animals are able to go anywhere where the public, patrons, or customers are allowed to go. So for example, in a restaurant, they would be allowed to accompany the individual with a disability in the dining area or going to a restroom, but they presumably wouldn't be permitted to go to a kitchen or an employee break room because the public is not typically permitted to enter those spaces. So that in terms of thinking about where a service animal is permitted to accompany a person with a disability, that rule of thumb, thinking about is the public allowed to go here, then a service animal is likely permitted to accompany the person with a disability in that area. And this is the one we get the most questions about. What are you allowed to ask? How do you know if a dog is a service animal? What can you do to kind of verify that? And the Department of Justice has said that you can ask only 2 very specific questions in determining whether or not an animal is a service animal. Number 1, is the animal required because of a disability? And number 2, what work or tasks has the animal been trained to perform? And just thinking about how this plays out day to day, thinking about, would you be able to ask these questions, or should you ask these questions if an individual is obviously blind and a dog is helping her navigate? And conversely, if an individual has no disability and it's unclear what the dog is doing. And again, the rule of thumb here is you should not need or seek out answers to these questions if the service animal is providing, the disability and the disability related need for the service animal is obvious. So, you know, if an individual is in a wheelchair or has a visible limp, or it's clear that they are blind and being the dog is helping with navigation, there's no need to ask those questions, and you shouldn't be asking those questions. However, if the disability and disability related need is not obvious, those are the questions that you are permitted to ask under the law. And we often get people with disabilities who give us a call and had very negative experiences at restaurants when they are asked for further certification or proof of their disability. We get a lot that restaurants will require or ask for medical documentation or some kind of special ID card, or will question the fact that a service animal is not wearing a harness or other identification. And under the law, you are not permitted to ask for that medical documentation, any kind of certification or ID card, and or require that a dog be wearing a harness or other identifier. And that goes back to what we had, or what I had mentioned earlier about the fact that the Department of Justice has not does not require any specific type of certification or training for a service animal. There's no sort of governing or certifying body. So often, as I'm sure people on this call are aware, you can go online and get these certification documents, but they're often not worth the paper they're written on, because there is no specific certification standard here. The focus should really be on, is this dog trained to perform, individually trained to perform those tasks to help accommodate a person with a disability? And that's really where what those questions are intended to identify. And then the other questions we often receive, is there any circumstances in which I can ask that a service animal be removed or require that a service animal leave? And yes, there are specific instances where that is permissible. And those would include, if the animal is out under the law, a service animal is required to be under a handler's control. So if an animal is out of control, is running around a restaurant, or growling or barking at individuals incessantly, or things of that nature, and the handler cannot and does not take action to remedy that issue or control the animal, then in those situations, it is permissible to ask that the animal or ask that the person with the disability remove the animal. Additionally, if the animal is not housebroken or has any kind of accident on the premises, that is also a situation in which places of public accommodation, restaurants are permitted to ask that the animal or that the person with a disability remove the animal. However, keep in mind that even if there is a situation where the animal is properly excluded, in those situations, you must still give the person with a disability the opportunity to obtain goods or services at the facility. So whether if that is by eating at the restaurant without the animal or getting some kind of takeout, the goods and services must still be provided to the person with a disability. And then I also wanted to flag this because we often hear the justification, hear allergies or another customer's fear of dogs as an attempted justification to deny access to a service animal. And the Department of Justice has said that that is not a sufficient reason to deny a person with a service animal. And instead, the focus should be on finding ways to accommodate both individuals and thinking of those creative solutions. And often that looks like, if you're in a restaurant, is there a way that you can separate the two parties, be it in different rooms or different areas of the restaurant, to ensure both of their needs are met? And some quick other sort of service animal rules I wanted to flag. You are not required, and when I say you, I mean the restaurant or the restaurant owner are not required to care or supervise the service animal. That is the responsibility of the person with a disability. And then the other thing to flag is that you, under the ADA, you're not permitted to charge any kind of surcharge for an individual to use a service animal on the premises, even if people accompanied by other animals or pets are typically required to pay a surcharge. However, keep in mind, if individuals are normally charged for damages that their animals do to the premises, an individual with a disability may be charged to address any damage caused by a service animal. And then the other thing, I know I had talked briefly earlier about how the ADA is the overarching federal law, but there are also a number of different state laws in play that inform this conversation. And I just wanted to flag that under the ADA does not cover service animals in training because service animals in training are not yet individually trained. And as we talked about, that's a really key piece to that definition. However, Illinois has a state law called the Service Animal Access Act that does provide protections for service animals as well as service animals in training in places of public accommodation. So what that means for you is keeping that in mind and thinking about being proactive about not just welcoming service animals, but also that piece regarding service animals in training as well. And as I mentioned, we would get to the piece about miniature horses, and as we look at miniature horses is not included in the definition of service animals, but there are specific regulations under the ADA that require public entities and places of public accommodation to modify policies to permit the use of miniature horses if it has, again, been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for that individual with the disability. And the regulations specify that there are 4 factors to consider when evaluating the use of miniature horses in places of public accommodation, keeping in mind the type, size, and weight of the miniature horse and whether the facility can accommodate those features. Again, whether the handler has sufficient control. Again, whether the miniature horse is housebroken, and whether the miniature horse's presence in a specific facility would compromise legitimate safety requirements necessary for safe operation. But if, again, if they are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of individuals with disabilities, they should receive the same treatment as a service animal. And then I just have here a little bit of the best practices piece of things, and thinking about disability etiquette for interacting with service animals in a facility like a restaurant. And a lot of these are common sense, but just to sort of, I think the reminders are always good. Don't pet the dog because service animals are working. They're doing that those work or those tasks that they've been individually trained to do. The other thing to keep in mind is for most people with disabilities I've spoken to, service animals are often considered extensions of someone's own body. They're a tool to ensure that people have access and are able to navigate the world independently, the same as somebody using a wheelchair or a cane or the like. And in the same way, you wouldn't, touch or push somebody's wheelchair without their consent. The same sort of principle and consideration applies here. And again, similar to what I had mentioned previously, but don't pet the dog, don't distract the dog, because again, they are working. And again, when they're working, they're just a tool for the people with disabilities to be able to navigate independently. So given that, the best practice is to ignore the dog. And again, common sense, but be respectful of people and remember the limited questions you are permitted to ask with regard to service animals. And then I have some additional hypotheticals here based on what I've been talking about. So one of your customers has a service animal. Another customer comes up to complain that she doesn't like dogs and would like the dog to be removed. How do you respond? Does anybody have thoughts on this? If not, I can go ahead and
ask if they can move that person to a table further away.
Exactly. And that can depend on the restaurant and what creative accommodations are possible given the space. But yes, definitely, that's usually what we would recommend. A customer enters with a dog. It does not appear that she has a disability. What do you do? And this one, again, is because it looks like, again, that the disability is not an obvious disability, and that disability related need is not obvious. That's when you would defer to those 2 specific questions. So is the dog required because of a disability? What work or tasks has the dog been individually trained to perform for the person with a disability? Okay. And then a customer has a dog which you believe to be a service animal. The animal starts relieving itself in the middle of the restaurant. What should you do? And that's again, like we talked about, that is one of those situations where you can certainly ask that service animal be removed. But in that situation, again, you still are required to provide the customer with a disability some means of accessing the services and goods provided at that restaurant. So be it offering the individual to continue to eat without the service animal present, or offering some kind of takeout option, but ensuring that that option is available to the person with a disability. Okay, and then I just wanted to, again, when thinking about best practices, how to kind of avoid the pitfalls that we often see with restaurants, and not being aware of how best to navigate these issues. Creating a service animal policy can be a super helpful way to not only clarify what your legal obligations are, or the legal obligations of a restaurant are, but in providing that policy and training staff on that policy, it ensures that everybody is on the same page in terms of how to respond should an individual with a service animal present for service. And I've included in there links for two different their settlements that the Department of Justice reached with two different restaurants, but there's policies, and it's the actual service animal policy at the end that you can take a look at, and if restaurants are interested in modeling policies after those policies, that's a great way to start. And then the other thing that we often advise people, in being proactive and recognizing that, welcoming people with disabilities and actively welcoming service animals makes good business sense. A cheap and easy way to prioritize that and to sort of signal that for people with disabilities is having something like a service animal welcome sticker on the front door of a restaurant. And then I just have at the end here some different resources that you can take a look at if you have additional questions. And I know I had sent the PowerPoint out prior to this presentation, so you should all have a copy of that. And as I mentioned, if you do have further specific questions, I also included the number for the Illinois ADA project. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen and see if anybody has questions that I can answer. Can the customer feed the animal if sitting calmly on the ground? And when you say customer, I just want some clarity as to are you speaking about another customer that is not the person with the disability? So in terms of feeding the animal, You wouldn't want to do that, especially unless you had specific permission from the person with the disability to do so, because as I mentioned, you know, that animal is a working animal, and feeding them or distracting them in any capacity can prevent them from doing their job. So I would strongly advise against that, but certainly if you receive different direction from the person with the disability, that's always who you're going to want to defer to.
So
owner of the animal. Yes, of course, the owner of the animal can certainly they know their animal best, and they can feed the animal as long as, like I said, as long as the animal is remaining under their control, and is not causing any kind of disruption in terms of interfering with the dining experience of others.
we had a question in the room that was asking if the dog is like constantly licking, including like the owner or the waiter, would that also kind of be in the same category as if the dog relieved itself in the store with regards to like lack of control?
I think that would be something you would want to try to resolve the issue with the owner of the animal themselves, and try to see if there's a way to address that issue. I do not, it's going to depend on the specific facts, but I don't think that rises to the level of being able to remove a service animal, especially without first trying to remedy the issue with the disabled person.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, and thank you for your questions.
Yeah, I just saw something else was posted in the chat. Any concerns with barking?
Yes, and I think that's another one where it's going to depend on the situation. You know, if because sometimes the way service animals have been trained to perform the tasks they've been trained for, they do that. They alert people by barking. So sometimes service animals will bark. But if it's incessant and constant, or they're growling at people or something of that nature, then that's closer to where you get to the line of being able to remove them. And like I said, I know that's not kind of a bright line rule, and with much of these things, that's kind of how things work. But I think it very much is situation dependent. All right, do we have any other questions? It's been great talking with you guys today. Really glad to have done this.
No, thank you, Lauren. I think this was very informational, very interesting too.
Yeah, and like I said, I included my email at the end of that PowerPoint. So if you have specific questions or want to follow up with me, definitely feel free to reach out that way as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course.
I don't have any other questions in the room with me presently. I don't see any in the chat. But Lauren, I do want to say thank you again for joining us this morning, kicking off our first session for today. It's really appreciated.
I was happy to do it. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your conference.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, let's see. I think our next session, you're welcome. Our next session does not start until 10 o'clock. So I think we can use this in between times, about 10 minutes as a break. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording, and then when we're about to start for our 10 o'clock presentation, I'll restart the recording. So I'll see everyone back here in about 10 minutes. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back from our little mini break. We now have our next presentation at 10 a.m. with Dewey Chase. I'm going to turn it over to him with his specialties to talk to us, to describe what we're going to be talking about today. So Dewey, you're all good to go.
Great. Thank you, Arne. Let me close that out so that doesn't beep. Okay, let me share my screen. Great. Thank you, Arne. And everyone, thank you for, sorry. I'll get it straight in just a minute. Thank y'all for being here, for allowing me to present virtually. It's always a pleasure when I get a chance to speak to this group in Illinois. So you're a great group. So what I wanted to talk about today was the MAC 5th edition. So if you're not aware, the MAC 4th edition was released earlier this year, and due to some holdups from COVID, it did get a late release. We did move ahead with submissions for the MAC 5th edition, which we're currently in the middle of that process now. But we may end up making some structural changes to the MAC review cycle process based off of experiences from the 4th edition. So we're going to talk about that today, and then we're also going to talk about some notable change requests that were submitted to the MAC 5th edition. Okay, so what kind of led the impetus for CMAC to look at improving the process? The first was, quite frankly, the sheer number of CRs that were submitted for the 4th edition. We had 531 CRs, which is almost a doubling of the typical submissions for the MAC in any given review cycle. So that number caused no small amount of stress with our volunteers and with the staff and with CDC. It was a heck of a lot of work. Now, we don't shy away from hard work by any stretch of imagination, but because of the amount of CRs that were submitted, we ended up with a whole bunch of CRs that were unsubstantial, that were not significant, and we had probably, if I had to guess, at least 10% of those CRs submitted that were playing kind of a game, so to speak, right? I hate to put it that way, but it was contingency CRs. Well, if A CR doesn't get approved by the TRC, then I'll go for B, C, and D. So there were several CRs of that nature. And unfortunately, even with the unsubstantial CRs, they still take a significant amount of time to look at, right? Once you get the TRC assembled and you get 13 volunteers that are experts in their field, there's no such thing as a 2-minute conversation on a change request. So each of them took a significant amount of time. We wanted to streamline the process to make it a better process for our volunteers, and then also end up with CRs that are better quality. So those were kind of our 3 main goals when we started looking at updating the 5th edition or the MAC review cycle process. Right? So we made 4 significant changes to the process. One is limiting CRs to 50 entries per person. We did not allow any editorial CRs. We're not accepting MAC Annex CRs, and overall improvement of the review process. So when we limited the CRs, it's important to note that we looked at kind of the average submission over the history of the MAC per person, which turns out to be about 5, right? So roughly 5 CRs per submitter is the average. So what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to put an arbitrarily low number. We didn't want to overly restrict CR submissions. We wanted to have enough space to where individuals can submit CRs that are meaningful and important to the MAC and for the MAC. So we chose with simply a simple order of magnitude, right? 50. So 5 times 10 gave us the CR submissions, maximum submissions per person. So this kind of helps drive and helps people really think about the CRs they want to submit. It also prevents individuals that want to make it quote unquote their code, right? Where they're trying to jockey for all of these different changes throughout the entire code that may or may not be reasonable, may or may not make sense for the rest of the country and for CDC and for the MAC. So again, so we looked at that number, simply that sheer order of magnitude for a single person average entry. We determined that there will be no significant impact on the quality of the submissions. In fact, we would see an improvement in quality of submissions, and it makes the review process easier for volunteers and leadership when you don't have one person submitting 100 to 150 CRs. So that was an important thing to do. It's to note, so how did this play out in the current 5th edition? It's important to note that the average submittal per person is less than 20. I think the highest number we had submitted from any one individual was 20 CRs for this particular round of the MAC. So we're still well within that 50 submittal per person range. So when we looking at substantive changes, right? So we wanted to acknowledge that there are some things that are the purview of the CDC. The first is the CDC has full rights to edit for grammar and formatting. So there is no need to have time spent in the CR review process on editorial changes like formatting and grammar. Those can be sent directly to CDC for consideration and for integration into the MAC. We also want to look at meaningful change, right? So we wanted to focus on substantive CRs, which has meaningful change to the code. So what is the basic definition of meaningful change, right? It's a change that modifies the intent or nature or makes a technical clearance or clarification rather for any given section, right? So again, we're focusing on CRs that would really be a significant change to the MAC, right, in their understanding or in what the language actually says. So this kind of means that we pulled all the editorial stuff, right, where, because we have several individuals in the industry that will go through and they'll find the editorial issues in the MAC and submit it, where maybe a definition is used incorrectly, maybe we have a small caps for a definition for a phrase that doesn't exist, for example. There's a couple of those submitted this year. So we had a lot of those type change, things come through, and those are being rerouted, and we're not taking up time for the TRC to review those CRs, right? Those are considered editorial. So we're also pulling the MAC Annex out of the CR submission window. So why is this, right? The Annex, unlike the code, is directly under the purview and discretion of the CDC. There's nothing that has to be voted for the Annex. The CDC can edit the Annex at any time they prefer, although the Annex is typically changed when the code is changed. Historically, CMAC has gathered CRs, Annex related, but honestly, it's just a better process to have this separate from the CR submissions. It works better, right? It's cleaner, it's neater, it's tighter. We also note that having to sort through significant CRs submitted for the Annex adds a lot of complexity and confusion in the review and voting process. So this cleans up the entire process altogether. And then it also noted that as part of our review cycle, CMAC does have a standing committee that aids the CDC in updating the Annex. We will be forming that committee soon. The notification will go out probably next week that we're calling for Annex committee members. So please take a look for that if you're looked in with CMAC, and we would love to have your application come through on that committee. So again, the theme is simplifying the process, right, to where this whole CR review process is easier, specifically for our volunteers. So a good example of that ease that needs to happen was for the third edition and for the fourth edition, we ended up having 4-hour meetings for the TRC, which is insane. I remember I was on the technical review committee for the third edition as an active operator managing a facility, and the meetings were in summertime. So I would have to spend 4 hours locked in my office looking out on a pool that was full of kids when I should have been doing deck management. And that's the nature of the beast, right? But 4 hours was a huge commitment every 2 weeks throughout summertime. So that's one of the changes we made for volunteers. So we dropped the 4 hours and we're focusing on a little bit different process, which we'll talk about momentarily. We also changed to where all the CRs and the evaluations are all submitted electronically. What happened prior to this was you had a Word document if you wanted to submit a CR that had to be downloaded, filled out, sent back in as a PDF to CMAQ. Same thing for the TRC, TSC evaluations. So we took the opportunity after the fourth edition to upgrade the whole process to now everything is submitted online through a submission form on cmac.org. We also created an editorial review board. So we mentioned earlier about non-substantive changes, right? The grammatical things, the editorial things. Well, what happens with all that? We still technically accept them. So we still look at our experts and volunteers and stakeholders across the industry, both in public health and the aquatics industry, to help CDC and help us edit the MAC. So the difference is when there's an editorial CR that's submitted, we formed an editorial review board consisting of myself as technical director, the TRC chair, the TRC vice chair, a representative from CDC, and a CMAQ board member. Because what we didn't want to do is have this little vacuum where one person was identifying and making a decision on whether or not a CR was editorial or not. Because honestly, what may look like a simple editorial change could have significant impacts on the code and the code meaning. So we assembled a group of individuals, and this will be a standing committee from this board, fourth standing board, to review editorial CRs and find consensus. If the editorial review board achieves consensus that it is editorial, then those CRs are set to the side, pulled out of the TRC review process, and then fast-tracked into the MAC through CDC. If the review board decides, no, this is not an editorial, this does have larger impacts, then it goes back to the TRC for review and consideration. So again, we're creating this process, right, to manage the CR submissions and to create a situation where ultimately on our volunteers, it's easier, while at the same time having transparent processes and checks and balances in place. So what else do we do as far as the review process? We refined the roles of the TRC chair and vice chair. The TRC chair roles were fairly defined, but the vice chair needed some tweaking. So the last couple of editions, the vice chair really didn't have a big workload to do. It rested mainly on the chair. So we tweaked that to where the vice chair now kind of wrangles, so to speak, all the TSC assignments and evaluations. We changed it to where the TSCs are automatically assigned CRs. So TSCs are our technical support committee. There are 7 different ones that we form. Some will have more CRs to review, some not. But each CR is automatically assigned to one or more TSCs for review. In the past, this was one where the facilitator, then champion, would have to review the change request, reach out to a technical support committee to have them review the CR. So it was an arbitrary process. So with the automatic assignment, it eases the workflow. It takes a little bit of burden off our facilitators for the CR management. And then ultimately, it's a little bit faster process to get the support committee, technical support committee evaluation forms back in. One big change we made was we changed the term CR champion. From the very beginning of the process, we referred to a change request or CR champion as a member of the TRC who was assigned a change request to see through the whole review process. Well, the issue we had with that was champion, as it was pointed out by one of our strong volunteers, champion infers that they're supporting that CR, and that may not be the case. It may be a revolutionary CR that is way too ahead of its time, that doesn't need to be in the MAC. It may be a horrible idea that gets in the MAC, right? So the CR champion, right, that implies that they're supporting that CR. So we changed the name to CR facilitator to recognize that all they're doing is facilitating the review and discussion on that change request. They're doing their research, they're looking at the technical support committee evaluations, and they're leading that discussion, so to speak, in the TRC meetings. And then two other things we did differently is that as soon as we opened the window for CR submissions, which was, I believe, April 1st of this year, we had the technical review committee and technical support committees formed and ready to go. In the past, we would form, the CMAC would form these committees after the submission window is closed, delaying the work time. So we opted to go ahead and start these committees to where they could start their chart of work and work on these CR reviews as CRs come in. And that was largely helpful. We were able to keep our meetings to largely an hour or less in most cases, at least early on in the process. Now, I'll talk a little bit about the submittals momentarily, but that has thrown a little bit of a kink in our plans on that. So let's take a few minutes and let's look at some statistics of CRs that have been submitted for this go-round. We had 203 CRs in total submitted for the MAC 5th edition. We had one withdrawn CR, which leaves us with 202 active CRs. Now, the most interesting thing is 50% were submitted within the last 2 weeks of the submission window. We knew anecdotally that most CRs came in the latter half of the submission window. But we didn't have good stats. We didn't know what that percentage was. We didn't know exactly how that happened. So we started purposely tracking that as of this cycle. And we found that 50% or 101, basically, it's actually 50.375%, something like that. But 50%, half of them came in within the last 2 weeks of the submission window. So that's kind of caused a little bit of a challenge, and that was unexpected, that volume for the last 2 weeks. It's caused a little bit of a challenge in that now we're having to extend the TRC meeting times. We're moving from a 1-hour meeting to a 2-hour meeting, and we're adding, I believe, 3 additional meetings to get through with the workflow. We had 18 CRs that were submitted as part of the MAC ISPSC PHTA2 harmonization process. Something that was really on our radar this year was looking at harmonizing these other codes, specifically the MAC and the ISPSC. We hear from designers, we hear from public health officials that having to navigate the 2 codes is challenging. I'm happy to say that on the MAC side of things, we submitted 18 CRs to harmonize with the MAC, with the ISPSC, largely minor, right? Adopting some language that was present in the ISPSC that wasn't in the MAC, such as floodways and restrictions there, things like inspecting process piping before backfilling, things of that nature. And then, of course, PHTA released PHTA2, which is our operation guidance. So we're also looking at harmonizing the MAC with PHTA2. So those were CRs that we identified for the MAC. There was about, going off the top of my head, about 25 to 30 possibly that were identified as changes to make to the ISPSC. So that's not an exact number. I don't have an exact count, but it seems like that's pretty close to the right number. We had 10 CRs that were identified as editorial and will bypass TRC review. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Well, like now, we had 22 CRs total that was submitted as editorial. Now, where's the difference? The editorial is selected at CR submission. So out of that 22, we identified 10 that are legitimately editorial. There's no concerns about larger language impacts. There's no concerns about whether or not we need further review. They're clearly were editorial by the board. The remaining 12 was kicked back to the TRC. Now, since in the last week or so, actually the last meeting, which was Wednesday, we've identified about another 6 or 7 out of those remaining 12 that the TRC agrees are editorial. So that brings us down to about 5 or 6 roughly that were submitted as editorial, but may have larger changes or larger impacts in the map that need further review. We had 62 that were CRs that were submitted that revised existing language. What's interesting is we had 111 that included new CRs, where new language is being added to the map. We had 4 delete and substitute, and then we had 3 delete with no substitutions. So just some interesting statistics on the type of CRs that we're getting. When we look at committees, CMAQ did have several committees that were active for this review cycle. One is including surf venues, which submitted 8 change requests, including 1 large CR that will be added, hopefully, to Section 7, the not special venues. We had 2 CRs submitted for artificial swimming lagoons, including 1 very large CR. We had 18, as I mentioned earlier, submitted from MAC ISPSC PHTA2 Harmonization Committee. That's a mouthful. So we had 18 from there. We had 11 that was submitted from a committee formed to look at and evaluate single pass splash pads or flow-through splash pads. This committee resulted from a conversation that was held last year in 2022 with some health officials that expressed some concerns about single pass splash pads and their impact on public health. So we put together a committee including 2 to 3 health officials and identified a few areas that we probably want to have some regulatory language on. And so we have CR submitted to include that. One thing that's notable is that water quality advisories. So, obviously, if you have a boil water notice or other water quality advisory, you don't use the water, you flush the water out of your house before use once the advisory is lifted. However, there's nothing out there for splash pads, these single pass units. So it was always kind of this thing that was missing, this gap. So that was a CR that was submitted for inclusion in the MAC to require closure of single pass splash pads during any sort of boil water notice or water quality advisory, and a 30-minute flush once the advisory is lifted before reopening. So food for thought for our health officials and environmental health folks out there. The single pass splash pads, are we addressing water quality advisories when there's a break or loss in pressure? So that's a very good question. We also had one submitted from a committee for lifeguarding that reviewed all the lifeguarding and bather supervision practices, specifically lifeguarding, from the existing MAC from the fourth edition. And they identified 6 areas that were notable that wanted to submit a CR for. So really some interesting stuff, right? So let's talk about some notable CRs that were submitted. So I do want to mention that these CRs do not include TRC recommendations or public comments. Some of these CRs have already been discussed. Some are still in the docket to be discussed. But I wanted to just kind of mention the CRs itself. If I run across one where I know the TRC has voted on, I'll certainly mention that. However, many of these are still waiting to be reviewed by the Technical Review Committee. So I have 17 here, is actually 18, right? But again, the MAC ISPSC Harmonization Committee, the goal was to review and improve the areas of disagreement between the two codes, as well as the PHTA2 operations standard, which was created last year, or early this year, rather. So we had 18, I need to correct that, 18 that were submitted on behalf of this committee. These were largely uneventful CRs. As I mentioned, it included some word language about backfilling for piping, including flood areas, floodways into the MAC. Very minor things, having our clocks for spas. More significantly, we had a CR submitted that included floor inlets for pools wider than 50 feet. One thing notable was this CR, which was replacing the 25% max turn down with a performance standard. So the turn down allowed for the rise of VFDs, variable frequency drives, and was included in the MAC in 2018 with the third edition. We have to say that honestly, the 25%, we don't know if that's accurate or not, right? That was a number that was consensus driven, but no real data behind it. And this turn down only applies to unoccupied, unused, or closed periods of the aquatic venue, overnight, for example. So instead of having the 25% turn down, which was a random number, a CR was submitted to both the MAC and also for the 2027 version of ISPSC that allows for a replacement of the language to include preventing cavitation and allowing for controller function. So again, more of a performance standard than a arbitrarily assigned percentage. Even though I have to say that there were some really great minds that came up with that 25% range. However, it still was an arbitrary number. So again, shifting to a performance standard. And again, these have not been voted on. These are just submitted CRs. The process will be that the TRC reviews and makes a voting recommendation. Then membership will vote in February, March of 24. And then the board of directors for CMAC has to ratify the votes, and CDC has to accept, right? So I think last year, but for the fourth edition, I think there were 9 CRs that the board of directors recommended a different vote than the membership. And overall, there was about 5% of CRs that the CDC did not accept. So just a little bit more interesting stats there, right? So we talked about floodway language added to the ISPSC. Part of this is requiring design compliance with American Society of Civil Engineers flood resistant design and construction standard. It does exempt tidal and storm surge flooding. So these are only areas that are prone to flash floods, prone to more localized flooding, and not necessarily on the coast where hurricane storm surge can impact. So your coastal areas, Atlantic seaboard, going down across the Gulf Coast into Texas primarily. So we also added construction tolerances. There was a CR submitted that prohibits skimmer equalizers for VGB compliance. We've already talked about piping inspections and floor inlets for venues wider than 50 feet. For the surf venues and artificial swimming lagoons, CMAC has had several webinars to educate stakeholders on these venues. These are significantly large CRs that we could spend, honestly, an hour presentation on each. So to really do these two justice, we're looking at basically 2 hours. If you have any questions about surf venues and swimming lagoons, please email me at deweycase@cmac.org. And we'd love to be able to share with you the webinars we've had on these, explaining these facilities, and answer any questions that you have. Currently, globally, there's less than 20 surf venues that have been built. I think it's actually less than 10, but these are growing in popularity. And then also for swimming lagoons, there's around 20 or 30 or so swimming lagoons, artificial swimming lagoons that have been built. The things that set these apart, right, is that in a surf venue, this is not the rides like Flow Rider and Epic Surf. These are large volumes of water, million gallons of water plus, that create surfable waves. I was speaking with one developer, and they actually created a pool that can create an 8-foot wave if you wanted to surf, which is insane. But they're doing some really neat stuff with that. With the artificial swimming lagoons, these are acre-sized pools, right? So they're artificial, they're man-made, they're lined. There's no earth or sand bottoms, but we're talking about acres of water and millions of gallons, if not a billion gallons of water. So definitely interesting stuff. So please feel free to reach out to me for more specific discussion on these. I'd love to have that conversation with you. So as mentioned earlier, we added a committee for single pass splash pads. So these are looking at non-recirculated interactive water features to look at various health concerns, right? So a couple of CRs that came out of that was to modify the definitions, be inclusive of non-recirculated venues, requiring that these facilities are designed where plumbing can be drained and flushed. Requiring a 15-minute flush prior to daily use was one that these individuals, this committee, decided was critical to have, right? And that's to help kind of flush out stagnant water, right? Much like you would a shower at a hotel, where water just sits in the piping, and then you flush it to get nice, clean, fresh water. And then, of course, we've already talked about the water quality advisories, but requiring closure during water quality advisories and the subsequent 30-minute flush before reopening after the advisory has been lifted. From the lifeguarding standpoint, the major CR that was submitted was one that's requiring at least 2 lifeguards where there's a single zone of patron surveillance. This is an area where the MAC has been historically silent, other than discussing your zones of patron surveillance and facility safety plans. This is kind of interesting, especially in the midst of a lifeguard shortage, quote unquote. However, the problem was, right, the MAC is silent on requiring at least 2 lifeguards. However, there's no major training agency curriculum that has any content on single lifeguard rescue and resuscitation skills. So we have many facilities out there that has a single lifeguard, but there's 0 training content for them. So this is a major gap that was seen that this committee wanted to address. It is noted that the TRC has not discussed this CR just yet. I'll be curious to see what their deliberations are and what their recommendations are. So other changes that came out of the CRs that come out of the lifeguarding committee was requiring lifeguard or guard be present and visible on uniforms. Revises language for lifeguard supervisor qualifications. This is not to take the course. The restrictions that were in place to prevent someone from taking a lifeguard supervisor course were lifted. The committee did not want to create barriers to education. However, to serve as a lifeguard supervisor, they wanted to clarify that language to require 100 hours of service as a lifeguard, right? When that happens is undefined. That could happen 10 years ago, right? Requiring basic level CERT, supervisor CERT, and being able to communicate in English or the language used commonly in that area. It's an acknowledgement that there are some areas of the country where English is not the dominant language, right? Where the facility will use a different language. So again, try to remove some barriers to where facilities can be more functional and the areas can be more functional. Clarifying supervisor roles, a CR that was submitted to where a supervisor can't supervise the pool and sit in the stand at the same time. And of course, and another CR was requiring the benefits of oxygen in drowning care in curriculum. There was some heavy discussion about whether or not oxygen should be included as requirement in the training curriculum. And there are obviously some concerns with that. And that was considered to be a step too far, more revolutionary than evolutionary. So the committee agreed that having the language requiring training agencies to discuss the oxygen benefits are important, but leaving the agencies to have oxygen modules to not require it in training, but allowing the facilities to opt to go down the road if they want to was the ultimate outcome. So we had several CRs that were submitted by individuals, not committees, right? We're grouping all of these by topic. There's definitely some interesting ones in here, right? So for imminent health hazards, there were several CRs that were submitted for this. One was adding improper chemical storage as an immediate closure. This is in rise to chemical-related injuries among staff and patrons. So if you have a bucket of chlorine with an open lid in the middle of a pump room, then that facility could be shut down by a health official until that's rectified. So that was submitted. Also, overall improper chemical storage too. So you're looking at acids stored above dry chemicals, things of that nature. There was also multiple CRs that added the lack of properly functioning interlocks to the imminent health hazards. So if you have a chemical controller that's not properly interlocked, that would be a closure item by health officials. We had multiple CRs submitted for this. This is an important one in that we continue to have 12 to 20 accidental chemical related accidents on average every year. So it's a problem that still exists. So adding that language to the MAC opens that door for health officials to have a closure item. We had one CR that changes the CYA DPD FC. This is the ratio of cyanuric acid to free chlorine, closure from 45 to 1 to 150 to 1. And then we also had a CR that requires closure at over 10 part per million sanitizer concentration, whether it be chlorine or bromine. That one's a little bit of a nuanced and really it comes out of the ISPSC MAC Harmonization Committee looking at EPA labeling and label uses. There is some disagreement on that approach in that pool water is not drinking water. So the EPA label requirements technically do not apply, but that's an ongoing issue in the industry. And this is a nod to try to halfway address that in a reasonable manner. Okay, from disinfection, right? So was a CR that was add closure remediation at 300 part per million cyanuric acid. That was submitted for the 4th edition, but it was shot down because of a white paper, and it wasn't necessarily scientifically valid. However, we've had new information that was submitted to support scientifically the 300 ppm cyanuric acid. We had one that changed the operational limit of CYA up to 100 part per million, eliminating EPA FIFRA registration for pool chemicals, because that's not the submitter claims that the EPA FIFRA is not an appropriate use for this, because yes, they're pesticides, but FIFRA, the argument isn't really targeted towards swimming pools. We had one CR that submitted that allows for secondary treatment technologies from, for example, the German DIN standards, the Austrian Ostrom standards, or more importantly, NSF 61 and NSF 419. So we can talk about that more momentarily. We have a CR submitted that removes a 10 part per million upper range and refers to manufacturer labels. We require monthly pseudomonas testing and remediation for facilities as well. So I said Ostrom, but Onrum. This is interesting in that there's been significant discussion or so in the last year or so, rather, maybe 2 years, about filter efficiency and filter effectiveness. And one barrier has been the traditional requirement for NSF 50, which is specifically pool related. when you look at NSF 419, that's when we start seeing ultrafine filtration, drinking water quality filtration. And as we look to evolve and have better facilities, healthier water, the NSF 50 only designation was identified by a submitter as a concern. So by allowing NSF 50 or NSF 419, this opens the door to allow ultrafiltration processes to come in place to improve filter efficacy, improve filtration, have a true 1 log reduction in cryptosporidium per pass, and overall have much better water. So there was one submitted for that, as well as looking at compliance as an option with German DIN standards, Austrian Ornorm, or the Swiss standards. And again, this is all set around opening up for improved filter efficacy and improved filtration and healthier water. So this is one definitely to watch and to see where this discussion goes. So far, the TRC discussion has been positive towards that because it is an option and it is seen as evolving the industry. Long-term discussion and impacts, we'll be curious to see how that goes. This also, if you saw a submission to have an optional performance-based filter regulation. So this is a pretty significant CR that was submitted, pretty lengthy CR, but basically it's creating an incentive to use high-efficiency filters that do reduce cryptosporidium per pass. So it's really, really interesting. Among this CR, we see also a minimum sanitizer level of 2.0 part per million, 2 part per million chlorine, and no cyanuric acid allowed. It allows for coagulant injection systems, and it also creates an exception for high efficiency filters that flow in no more than 12 gallons per minute per square foot. So again, it's a very interesting CR. I'll be curious to see where this goes with the TRC and how the TRC and our voting membership falls on this. This CR could be significant in that it opens the door to the industry to ultrafiltration, which is not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. Other lifeguard-related CRs that were submitted that did not come out of the lifeguarding committee, these were individual submissions, was one that removes the break after 60 minutes for single lifeguard facilities. It adds the Ellis 1020 rule as a requirement. Both of those so far have received no votes from either the technical support committee or from the TRC. Requires lifeguards in any venue with an underwater shelf. We have another CR that was limiting zones to 2,000 square foot max, and also requiring testing on lifeguard stand placement to see arms and legs. The TRC has not deliberated these last three. TSC feedback has been neutral on underwater shelves and overwhelmed and not positive. They've been at the negative view on the limiting zones to 2,000 square foot and also the arms and legs stand placement. So those still have to be debated by the TRC. Let me go back 1 second. On the arms and legs clarifier for lifeguard stand placement, the TSC acknowledges that that is an antiquated way of looking at drowning and what a drowning victim looks like and isn't necessarily appropriate. They agree with the testing for lifeguard stand placement, but that's already in the MAC as part of the zone validation process in the safety plans. On the 2,000 square foot max, again, that is the view of the TSC, that's an outdated way of looking at your staffing plan and where you place lifeguards. So 2,000 square feet is basically the size of an average 6-lane, 25-yard pool. And a single zone would be fine for a lap swim. But you would need more than one lifeguard for a group swim, pool party, things of that nature. So again, it's an acknowledgement that sometimes these older concepts need to be abandoned for more modern use. A couple of miscellaneous ones. There was a CR submitted that requires all test kits to be certified at NSF 50 level 1. I'll be curious to see how this tracks out with the TRC as well. And then another one that adds pressure switches to interlock options. And just clarifying that, yes, you can have a pressure switch as this option, right? So again, that would be for your peristaltic pumps, things of that nature. Okay, so kind of details, right? The comment period, the initial comment period closes on November 14th. So there's still plenty of time to get your comments in. Please go to cmac.org/change request. You can view all of these CRs that were mentioned and input your comments, right? We want your comments to be put in on these. We want to hear from stakeholders. Remember, the first comment period, the initial comment period, is designed to influence the TRC, to influence discussion deliberation on these CRs. The second comment period currently will open December 6th, and that second comment period, that focus is to influence voting membership, right? It will not influence the TRC, but will influence the votes, so you can influence your peers. The Vote on the Code conference is February 16th and 17th, 2024 in Reno, Nevada. It's co-located with the Association of Aquatic Professionals Conference. If you are interested in going to that, we would certainly love to have you. Please check out our webpage, cmac.org, or shoot me an email for more information, and we can certainly get you that. So what's in store for the MAC 5th edition? So we have the Vote on the Code conference in February, then we have a 30-day voting window immediately after that. And then we'll have track changes submitted to CDC by April 30th. And currently the CDC anticipates releasing the 5th edition likely in the fall of 2024. So we'll see that new edition come out relatively quickly. We do not anticipate the release delays that we had with the 4th edition. And then there was significant discussion among CDC among the timing of the release. And one thing that CDC feels strongly on is releasing in the fall to get past that summer operation period. So we do look for that in third quarter 2024. Here's more information on Vote on the Code. So please consider attending. We would love to have you there. If you're able, we'd love to see you at the entire conference. We do have our MAC track sessions offered during AOAP, which are MAC and public health specific. We have some great panels that will be there. And overall, this is a really great conference, just all in all. So if you're able to attend, we would love to see you there, love to see you participate, love to meet you, shake your hand, put a name to the face, and have you involved in the process. So with that being said, Arne, I'm going to open up for any questions from the audience.
All right, there's no questions here in person. Does anyone have any questions in the chat? I don't see any posted, but Dewey, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming to present for us today.
My pleasure, always a pleasure. And I do want to say one thing before we go. You know, I'm very cognizant of the work that our health officials do. And I'm an operator, right? I'm an old pool operator from way back. What I've always believed in is that we should not be antagonistic as operators towards our public health officials. And all too often that's the case, right? All too often we wind up with this antagonistic, almost adversarial kind of a Cold War between our pool inspectors and our pool operators. And I think that's a shame, right? So a part of my work with CMAC is to help quell that, right? To help build bridges between inspectors and operators and help kind of change that narrative. So I view our health officials as our lifeguards, right? So you're my lifeguard as an operator. You're the one looking at the details that in the midst of running swim lessons and budgets and operating and trying to hire staff and train and meetings, you're the folks that come in that double checks me. So, I just wanted to say that, you're our lifeguards, right? And whether or not the facilities indicate that appreciation or not, you are appreciated. And I want to say thank you to your, specifically in the work that y'all do, not just in aquatics, but overall, right? Whether it's inspecting tattoo parlors, food services, hotels, water systems, whatever you're doing, I truly believe that our health officials are unsung heroes, right? You're the folks that keep us safe and healthy, and you don't get near enough credit. So just a big thank you to y'all for the work that you do.
Hey, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. And I see some thank yous coming up in the chat. So again, Dewey, thank you so much for joining us. Let's see, what time is it? It is 10:52. We can do the same thing that we did if you guys wanted to take another mini break before our next presentation starts at 11. That's completely fine. I'll do the same thing. I'll pause the recording and then restart up. So let's kind of meet back in about 5 minutes, give or take. And I'll see you guys then. Thanks.
And thank y'all for allowing me to be here today. Thank y'all.
Yeah, of course. Okay, welcome back everybody from our mini break. We're now moving on to our 11 a.m. session, and we have two presenters for this time frame. We have Julie Schilf, who'll be talking to us about plastic pollution reduction efforts. And then we also have Chris Newman, who'll be talking to us about EPA sustainable. Oh, sorry. Oh, flip-flops. Sorry. Julie Schilf will be talking to us about EPA sustainable management of food programs. Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. Give me one moment while I get going with my screen here. Please bear with me. And I am, hold on, please. Apologies. Here we go. Okay. Share. And all right, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, we can see you.
No notes or anything?
Nope.
Okay,
No
great. Thanks so much. I'm a little monitor challenged today. Okay, well, thanks for having me and for inviting me to participate in this conference and to share with you some information on EPA's Sustainable Management of Food program. My name is Julie Schilf, and I'm the SMF Program Coordinator for EPA Region 5. Our office is located in Chicago. If you're not familiar with sustainable management of food, this approach really aims at reducing wasted food and its associated impacts across its entire life cycle. EPA's sustainable management of food work also supports our vision to promote a circular economy. So today, I really hope to help you understand the issues and impacts associated with wasted food, and I'll provide you with some information on what EPA is doing to reduce food loss and waste. And that includes what you see here: prevention, recycling, and enhancing policies. So first, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. Our most recent estimates from 2019 indicate that just over 66 million tons of wasted food was generated in the retail, food service, and residential sectors. And most of that ended up in our landfills, about 60%. This makes food the single most common material found in our landfills, making up 24% of all of the municipal solid waste that ends up in the landfill. So this is a problem, obviously, because the production and management of this material is as a waste, it just uses a significant amount of resources. It contributes to a broad range of environmental impacts, including climate change, which I'll talk about in a minute, air pollution, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, soil and water quality, the list goes on. And this is happening while many folks lack equal access to nutritious, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. So I've given you an idea as to how much food is being wasted and generated and why it's a problem, but really, how is it impacting our lives and our environment? So the USDA recently released their annual report on household food security in the US and found that 12.8% of households were food insecure in 2022. That's about 17 million households. So what this really means, and some of you may know this as health people, is that food insecure households had difficulty at some point during the year providing enough food for the members of their household due to a lack of resources. And this number is significantly higher than 2021, which was 10.2%. So really the important question here is, how have 17 million households experienced food insecurity at some point last year while so much food is simultaneously being wasted? Wasted food also impacts our environment, as I've mentioned. For example, producing, processing, packaging, distributing, preparing, and disposing of that amount of food that's currently wasted is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and requires enough water and energy, for example, to supply more than 50 million homes each year. We can see some other impacts here as well. Takes up an area of ag land equal to the size of California and New York, fertilizer to grow all plant-based foods for US consumption, and is equal to more than 42 coal-fired power plants. And on that note, wasted food also impacts our climate. Methane is generated at landfills when organic waste breaks down in anaerobic conditions. We recently released our Quantifying Methane Emissions from Landfill Food Waste report, which addresses how much of the methane emitted from landfills is generated specifically by wasted food. What we found is that 58% of those methane emissions released into the atmosphere from landfills is from landfill food waste. So EPA has been working on food waste for many years. We've been doing this for maybe 20 years, but more specifically and importantly, in 2015, the 2030 food loss and waste goal was announced by the USDA and FDA. And the goal is to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by the year 2030. And since we've announced the goal, EPA's aligned that with the International Sustainable Development Goal, which is SDG 12.3. And by doing so, our role alongside the USDA and FDA is to really challenge stakeholders to prevent food waste from being generated in the first place, and to ensure food is being used to feed people and to recycle anything remaining. This goal really sets the stage for EPA's work moving forward. And from a climate perspective, I can't stress enough how important prevention is, since the majority of greenhouse gases from food waste are created before the food even ends up in the disposal process. So I'll get into some more details about EPA's work here. It's really focused on accelerating the prevention and recycling of organic waste through three topic areas. Obviously, preventing the wasting of food across our supply chain from farm to fork, improving equitable access to healthy, nutritious food, increasing the recycling rate for all organic waste, and enhancing policies to support prevention and recycling of food waste. And if that's not very clear, I know it sounds really broad to say that. So just to give you an idea, in 2021 alone, there were 25 states that had proposed food waste legislation to address this issue. So it's constantly being reproposed in more and more states every year. And we want to assist states and local governments and support them in any way possible. So the first topic, preventing the wasting of food wherever possible, while increasing the recycling of organic materials is obviously critical. 85% of greenhouse gas emissions from landfilled food waste actually happens before disposal. And this is why we're so focused on prevention. And it's also why prevention is at the top of our hierarchy as the most preferred action. And you'll see that right here. And some of you may notice this is not the hierarchy you may be familiar with. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and why this has replaced it later on in the presentation. EPA has developed some tools and resources designed to assist stakeholders and communities with ways that they can prevent wasted food. The first is the Preventing Wasted Food in Your Community Toolkit, which provides a framework and guidance with customizable materials for communities who are developing behavior change campaigns to reduce wasted food. The primary objective for developing this tool is to help those communities that are already stretching their limited resources by giving them free materials that they can easily access and use and follow guidance for, so they can develop and implement their own campaign. The tool, like I said, is free and available on EPA's webpage. It contains a PDF of the toolkit and 5 sets of customizable campaign materials that can be downloaded. The second effort is the Food Too Good to Waste Peer Network, which is led by our headquarters office. And what they do is convene state and municipal government staff from across the country who are working to reduce wasted food specifically, with a strong focus on consumers and households. Although they don't limit it to prevention, but prevention is the overall topic area. And EPA is also funding $1.5 million to our Science to Achieve results grants to test food waste prevention interventions that help consumers waste less in various communities across the US. And as a part of that STAR grant, EPA also has small business innovation research grants, which support new technological approaches to prevent wasted food. Our next area of focus is increasing the recycling rate for organics, because even when we can prevent as much food waste as possible, we'll always be left with some kind of inedible food scraps to manage, right? So we have a lot of activity happening under this area. One tool that EPA has created to assist communities with diverting organic waste is the Composting for Communities Toolkit. This is similar to the Food Waste Prevention Toolkit I just mentioned. This one is specifically designed to assist communities that may be in 3 different phases of their compost programs. First, it can assist communities that are looking to launch a new curbside food scrap collection program. It can assist communities that want to increase participation in an existing program. And it can assist communities with decreasing contamination in an existing program as well. And again, find this on our website with more sets of customizable campaign materials for downloading. So managing inedible scraps also requires that the appropriate infrastructure be in place. And the recent bipartisan infrastructure law is providing $275 million to support state and local waste management infrastructure and recycling programs. These are brand new grant programs that were launched at the end of last year. The funds are expected to be allocated between last year and 2026. So the first one is that you see here on the left is the solid waste infrastructure for recycling grant program for political subdivisions. This is for municipalities, cities, towns, counties, any unit of government, primarily to fund projects that improve materials management and infrastructure. The next one is pretty obvious, the Recycling Education and Outreach Grant Program. This program funding is earmarked for counties, again, municipalities, states, tribes, and even nonprofits to fund projects to improve consumer education and outreach on prevention, reuse, recycling, and composting, just to name a few. And the third one on the far right is the solid waste infrastructure for recycling grant program specifically for states and territories. This is a non-competitive funding opportunity for our states and territories and the District of Columbia to improve solid waste management planning, data collection, and program implementation at the state level. So our data measurement work also supports organics recycling. The wasted food report, for example, which you see right here in this top left, includes estimates of how much wasted food is generated and managed nationally. Right here, you'll see our excess food opportunities map. This map contains more than 1 million potential generators of excess food and recipients of excess food, such as food banks, composters, and anaerobic digesters located across the country and possibly in your community if you're looking for a solution to deal with some excess food. So the EPA also has an anaerobic digestion data collection project, which summarizes data received from standalone digesters, on-farm digesters that co-digest food waste, and digesters at water resource recovery facilities. The reports really include information about the processing capacity of these facilities, as well as the total food and non-food waste process. By doing this, we really did this because we recognize that, this kind of data showing that capacity, a lot of that capacity is unused. So with that data, we can show the capacity of these facilities that are able to process food scrap. This can be really important information for states and communities and others looking for another option to manage organic materials. So research is also essential to meeting the country's sustainable management of food program objectives. EPA has released several reports, two most recently that you'll see in the front here, in support of advancing food loss and waste efforts. In November 2021, EPA released a report entitled From Farm to Kitchen, the Environmental Impacts of US Food Waste, and that's what you see here in the blue. This report is part one of a two-part series. It reveals the environmental impacts that occur from the farm to the consumer of food that is ultimately lost or wasted. These impacts do not include the impacts of waste management, such as landfilling the food, however, but it does detail the environmental savings possible through the prevention of food waste, and actually found that nearly half of the impacts associated with food loss and waste occurring in America could actually be avoided. And like I mentioned earlier, while recycling is an important tool to reduce the environmental impacts of food waste, only prevention can really achieve this magnitude of savings. So the environmental impacts of US food waste management pathways from field to bin is the second part of this series, and that's what you see right here. This report, again, examines the environmental impacts and benefits of each of the food waste management pathways that we use for food, from composting to anaerobic digestion to landfilling to combustion. Together, these two reports really provide a nice comprehensive assessment of the impact of food loss and waste throughout the US. So the other report recently released is the quantifying methane emissions from landfill food waste, which I also referred to earlier in the presentation. This report contains the first peer-reviewed estimates of methane emissions attributable to food waste in our municipal solid waste landfills. Most estimates of landfill methane emissions before are calculated based on the biodegradation of municipal solid waste as a whole in these landfills. This report has allowed us to look at food specifically and found that in 2020, food waste was responsible for approximately 55 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. And you may recall that I mentioned earlier, an estimated 58% of the fugitive methane emissions, meaning emissions that were released just into the atmosphere from landfills, are attributed to landfilled food waste specifically. So there are some other reports hiding in the back here, these three, which address emerging issues in food waste management, and those include commercial pre-processing technologies, persistent chemical contaminants, and plastic contamination. And if you'd like to see those and learn more about these issues, I included the link at the bottom here for everyone to visit. So I'm going to discuss now how we translated the findings from that Part 2 field to bin report I just talked about into a new ranking of pathways, which replaces EPA's food recovery hierarchy that you may be familiar with and see here. We created this in the 90s, and over the years, EPA's received so many inquiries and questions from stakeholders about the hierarchy and the basis for the rankings, and how various pathways also compare against each other. We weren't always able to answer these questions based on the latest science. And now that we have developed this field to bin report, we were able to do just that. And this slide now shows the new wasted food scale, replacing the hierarchy, which ranks the food waste management pathways based on environmental impacts. It highlights the importance of preventing wasted food in the first place and avoiding sending food to landfills, incinerators, or down the drain. So prevention at the top left, down the drain, landfill and incinerating at the top right. They're obviously ranked from most to least environmentally preferable this way, as you can see. And pathways within the same tier are ranked equally. I do want to note that the analysis did not include economic or social impacts. This is based on environmental impacts only. So really quickly, what stayed the same? Source reduction, donation, animal feed at the top, landfill and incineration at the bottom. And we have 4 new pathways added. Upcycling, which is really exciting, unharvested and plowed in, food, land application, and sewer wastewater treatment. We removed industrial uses, and we've also made composting and anaerobic digestion equal in the scale. This is because of the benefits of applying compost to soil and the benefits of using anaerobic digestion to generate power and energy. So yeah, if you have any questions about this, I realize it's a lot to take in if you're only familiar with our other hierarchies. So put my contact info at the end of the presentation. You can reach out to me for a conversation separately if you'd like. So we also support policies through our networks and collaborations internally and externally. And we collaborate with those stakeholders on new tool development. I mentioned earlier that EPA collaborates with USDA and FDA on food loss and waste issues. This is called our Federal Interagency Collaboration. And with support from other agencies such as FDA and USDA, EPA continues to collaborate with G7, G20, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And what we really do with these groups is exchange best practices for reducing wasted food and we work on measuring progress together, which is really important for the international community to be on the same playing field. So in addition to those partnerships, EPA recently released an interactive collection of resources and external materials to help all kinds of stakeholders, states, local governments, nonprofits, companies, private sector, public sector, to help create effective programs for recycling across the board, not just for food scrap, but the whole spectrum: reuse, repair, waste reduction. And materials in the toolkit can really help stakeholders increase participation in recycling programs and reduce contamination in the recycling stream. EPA also has sustainable management of food representatives across 10 regions, like myself in Region 5, which you will see right here. We also host peer networks with state and local governments on related topics. That's the Food Too Good to Waste peer network that I mentioned earlier. And we also have the National Compost and AD peer network as well. The federal interagency collaboration also has a joint agreement with ReFed, which is one of our key partners. So we know that the most important strategy we can take to address wasted food now is to prevent it from being wasted in the first place. And everyone can take action to do this, whether you're an individual, a business, a school, nonprofit, faith-based organization. And you can visit this link at the top of the page to see all of our tools for preventing and diverting wasted food. And please check out any of these links for the resources I discussed today, to join the network, to receive our In the Loop newsletter, where you will learn and hear about when our grant opportunities open. Can learn more about existing funding opportunities. I linked our research twice in the presentation, so you can check that out. The Model Recycling Program Toolkit, which I just discussed, is here. And then always, for more info, we have an SMF webpage, a standalone page for that. And you can also reach me directly for assistance or for questions. Here's my phone number and my email. I'm always available. I love to have conversations and to assist people with implementing programs and helping them using our own tools and resources in their programs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Does anyone have any questions? Either in the chat, which I don't think I see any, or do you guys have any questions?
I think the one thing that keeps coming to my mind listening to all this is school lunches.
Okay.
I've worked in the school. I'm wondering, did they ever work with the school lunch programs?
There was a question here asking if you all ever worked with school lunch programs to reduce waste.
Yeah.
So that's more of a local level thing, right? I know at the state level in Illinois specifically, that's also not EPA as much as it is USDA, right? So they kind of make announcements. Each state actually has put out a statement saying they're voicing their support for these programs. There are a lot of take it or leave tables that we've helped people work with. Our Region 10 office has developed a guidebook on how to implement leave tables where students can leave food and other students can take it if they'd like. But there are so many local restrictions behind these. You know, there's temperatures that everything has to be left at. So a lot of it is really up to local health departments and what their rules are as well. So it takes a lot of work through districts, the state, and then districts and local health departments to make sure that these programs are implemented successfully and stay safe as well. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, well, Julie, thank you again so much. It's greatly
you.
appreciated. Sorry for getting the topics switched
Oh, no
up
worries. No worries at
the
all.
first round. So I'll go ahead and switch over then to Chris Newman. Now, Chris will be talking to us about plastic pollution reduction efforts. So Chris, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. Do you hear me okay?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, great. Give me one moment here to.
Oh, you do sound a little muffled, kind of like far away.
Okay, how do I sound now?
Oh, much better. Okay.
Okay, good. All righty. And oh, 1 minute. Hold on. All right, there we go. Now you should be able to see the full slide, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting EPA to be part of today's meeting and for us to have the opportunity to talk to you about these particular topics. Today, I am going to be talking about plastic pollution reduction efforts. Going to be giving some information on some things that we've done in the past and where we'll be going in the future. So first off, starting off at a very high level, I'm going to be talking about some of the programs and new efforts that we've started at EPA, and want to mention where we get the authority from, and what has helped move us along to get a little bit more involved in these issues than we had been in the past. And the number one name of the game is pretty much the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. Section 301 gets EPA more involved in making strategies for post-consumer materials management and water management programs. In the past, from the solid waste perspective, a lot of our authorities have been in landfills and waste disposal. We've worked in recycling, supporting our states with their efforts. But this, in a lot of ways, has been a local effort, and working with recycling and litter prevention. We've been involved, but our real authorities have been with that disposal side. So what the Save Our Seas Act has done is gotten the agency involved in developing a strategy that will help us get involved in post-consumer materials management and developing infrastructure specifically aimed at reducing plastic waste and other post-consumer materials in waterways and oceans. The oceans part is also a big part of what we had not been working on before. And we'll be engaging with our people in the office, our colleagues in the Office of Water as well, because it is a joint effort. So what that Save Our Seas Act has done has gotten us more active in developing our circular economy series strategies. These identify key actions that are needed to reduce the negative environmental and human health impacts of material extraction, processing, and disposal, while supporting growth through improved material recovery at end of life. Through the circular economy strategy, EPA is establishing a 10-year vision that embraces circularity and sustainable materials management, addresses climate change, and considers environmental justice. So our first strategy is the National Recycling Strategy. That's been followed up by the National Strategy to Prevent Plastics Pollution. We'll also have a food waste strategy, a critical mineral and electronics strategy, a built environment, and a textile strategy down the road. So digging a little bit deeper into the National Strategy to Prevent Plastics Pollution, this came out last April for public comment. And then with this plastic strategy and the National Recycling Strategy, EPA aims to provide an innovative solution and approach to reduce and recover plastic waste, as well as prevent plastic products from polluting the environment. This plastics strategy is part 2 of our strategy series, and there are 3 main objectives in it. One is to reduce pollution during plastics production, improve post-use materials management, and prevent trash and microplastics from entering waterways, and remove escape trash from the environment. The strategy also identifies actions that are needed in the United States to eliminate the discharge of plastics into the environment by 2040. And this includes things like supporting communities to develop effective reuse programs and working with manufacturers to design more reusable products. The public comment period closed on July 31st, and the agency is currently reviewing all the comments that have been received. So now we'll have a few more slides talking about the strategy in a little bit more detail. So what we have here is a chart that gets at the total plastic waste in the U.S. municipal recycling streams since 1960. And you can see that there's been tremendous growth over the years. What we have seen as we've gotten into the more recent times is that many organizations have concluded that business as usual and the way that they manage plastic waste is unsustainable. We've seen the Pew Charitable Trust release their report, Breaking the Plastic Wave, that the cost of managing plastic waste from now until 2040 will be over $70 billion greater than if the world would adopt a fully circular approach for materials management. Environmental and health impacts are also expected to increase due to an increase in plastic products and microplastics in the aquatic environment. Because of these concerns, there's a global consensus that a unified, comprehensive approach is needed to tackle the plastic pollution problem. And as you see from this graphic, EPA estimates that plastic waste in the municipal waste stream is growing and has been growing significantly. It's increased continuously since 1960, with the greatest increases going between 1980 and 2000. So plastic products in MSW predominantly consist of containers and plastic packaging. That packaging includes single-use products like bags, wraps, and bottles as well. So our goals and scopes for this, like I mentioned, the plastic strategy was developed under the authority of the Save Our Seas Act that charged EPA with developing a strategy to improve post-consumer materials management and infrastructure to reduce plastic waste and other post-consumer materials in waterways and oceans. Land-based sources account for up to 80% of the plastic waste that pollutes waterways and oceans. The figure and diagram that we have up on the screen now depicts the pathways of common land-based sources of plastic pollution. That includes litter from cars, trucks, garbage and recycling bins, pedestrian litter, and also illegal dumping activities. Identifying opportunities for improving the infrastructure for reducing and managing these wastes is the primary focus of the strategy. The strategy also clearly states that the agency does not consider activities that convert non-hazardous solid waste to fuels or fuel substitutes like plastics to fuel, or energy production to be recycling activities. So EPA is promoting circular economy policies while excluding processes that convert solid waste to fuels, fuel ingredients, or energy from being considered as a recycling practice. So according to the Pew Charitable Trust, this is their chart that's up on the screen right now, their report Breaking the Plastic Waves, that 80% number, an 80% reduction of plastic pollution could be achievable by 2040, but it depends on immediate, ambitious, and concerted global implementation of solutions across the entire plastic value chain. The graphic demonstrates a path to significantly reducing plastic pollution, which Pew called the systems change scenario. These concurrent interventions aimed at reducing plastic pollution could divert up to 195 million metric tons of plastic waste from polluting the environment by 2040 compared to the business as usual approach. Reuse could achieve up to 30% reductions in plastic waste. Substitution efforts, 17%. Improved innovations in recycling, 20%. And proper management of end of life could achieve a 23% reduction in plastic pollution in the environment. EPA's plastic strategy proposed many actions that would position the U.S. as a leader in developing the innovative circular approaches needed to reduce plastic pollution while growing the economy. So a few of the objectives, kind of highlighting some of the things that I mentioned, reducing plastic pollution during plastic production. This would be release of, say, nurdles, the small plastic pellets or plastic flakes from plastic manufacturing facilities. Improving our post-use materials management, keeping things from being used just once, but recovering them for a second use, or finding alternatives that are more reusable. And then also preventing trash and micro and nanoplastics from entering waterways and removing escape trash from the environment. So those are our three overall objectives. Now, digging a little deeper into those, we've got Objective A. Here we're taking a look at plastic pollution during production. So reducing production and consumption of single-use, unrecyclable, or frequently littered plastic products, and then minimizing pollution across the entire life cycle of plastics. Looking at post-use materials management, the agency can be taking a look and studying the effectiveness of effective policies and incentives on improved materials management, increased capacity to maximize the use of materials, facilitate more effective composting and degradation of certified compostable products, identify and improve solid waste management so that it does not adversely impact communities, increase the public understanding of plastics management and how they can appropriately manage plastic and other waste, and then also explore the possibility of ratification of the Basel Convention and encourage environmentally sound management of scrap and recyclables traded with other countries. And just a quick note, the Basel Convention is an international waste treaty that regulates the flow of waste, wastes between countries. Excuse me. And then finally, we've got Objective C. This is taking a look at trash and nanoplastics that enter the environment. So again, take a look at policies, programs, and other technical assistance to ensure actions that prevent these materials from entering waterways, or even be able to remove them once these materials have entered waterways. Improve water management to increase trash capture in waterways, and improve measurement of trash loadings into waterways so that we can make better decisions on management interventions. And then finally, increase public awareness on the impacts of plastic products and other types of trash in the waterways, and coordinate our research into how these micro and nanoplastics impact oceans and waterways. So what are our next steps? Our public comment period on the draft strategy ended on June 16th. This fall, we expect to publish our final strategy and then begin implementing it this fall as well. So there was a Federal Register notice that is available from back in May about the strategy. And if you'd like more details, you can go to epa.gov/circular economy. So now talking a little bit about grants that we have that support implementation of these strategies. Some of these are similar to what Julie mentioned, as they cover the same types of programs. This will be a little bit more tuned in to plastics recycling. So the bipartisan infrastructure law is helping EPA and communities implement the actions that were outlined in our strategies. We have two programs. We've got the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Grant that will help communities fund recycling, composting, reuse, and other solid waste infrastructure. Our first round of awardees for that has been announced already. And then we have our Recycling Education and Outreach Grant Program that's going to help communities educate their residents on what's accepted for recycling in their program, thus reducing contamination in the recycling stream and hopefully keeping materials and plastics out of nature. So those winners awardees are expected to be announced sometime this fall. So overall, we have $275 million for the Swiffer grants and then $75 million for recycling, education, and outreach. So the Swiffer grants, do a quick time check here. Okay, Swiffer grants are going to help local governments transform their post-consumer materials management infrastructure. They're going to fund projects that will significantly decrease MSW generation or divert MSW from landfills, and also fund innovative solutions that will help get materials out of the waste stream. So these projects for Swiffer are just starting to kick off. And as we've made our announcement, and there were awards made to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Lucas County, Ohio. And then also we anticipate a separate series of grants for the tribal organizations to be announced later this year. Additional funding will be coming out over the following 2 years. So through our Swiffer program, we did make 25 awards across the country, totaling $73 million that go out to various types of units of local governments. These programs are varied in what they have funded. So a few examples include purchasing fleets of new recycling collection vehicles and bins for curbside collection pickup in communities that don't have access, construction of recycling drop-off stations in rural areas where curbside collection is not feasible, and then infrastructure improvements to materials recovery facilities, such as construction of new buildings, addition of new equipment, like optical sorters and balers that can help more efficiently recover and move material onto markets. And then here we've got a map of where our various selectees are located across the country. So our recycling education and outreach grants is also a new program, and this is going to support communities' projects to inform their residents on what's accepted in community recycling programs, so the communities can increase their recycling rates and decrease contamination. Less contamination in the recycling stream means, hopefully should mean a cleaner recycling product, a product that's easier to sort, and also a product that is easier to market so that we can get that circle going full loop. Projects that could be funded under the RIO grants are public service announcements, door-to-door education and outreach campaigns, social media and digital outreach, and then labeling and signs. So these can be things that will help consumers and residents understand what kinds of plastics are acceptable in the local recycling system and which ones should stay out. This year, we're anticipating awarding about $30 million for these education and outreach projects, and we'll be making the selections announcements sometime this fall. And then we'll be using and making the remaining funding announcements through possibly through competitions in subsequent years. And I do want to also mention that about 20% of these funds are going to be allocated to support rural communities, low-income communities, and communities identified as Native Americans. So really working to get into a lot of different areas and communities with these funds. So talking a little bit about some Region 5 plastics projects that we've worked on over the past few years here in the Great Lakes region. One is Memorandum of Understanding on Plastics Reduction in the Mississippi River Basin area, Mississippi River area, as it's not the entire basin, but those areas close to the river. We signed, EPA signed an MOU with the Mississippi Rivers Cities and Towns Initiative in 2021 to reduce plastics from entering the Mississippi River. That group is working to develop a report to address litter leaking into the Mississippi River corridor. And I want to mention that that group is made up of the mayors of communities along the Mississippi River. It's a first of its kind. One of the things that's unique for us is it spans multiple EPA regions and also geographic regions across the country, going all the way from Minnesota down into Louisiana. So this will let EPA and bring us into the discussions with state and local governments, businesses, and concerned citizens to identify collective community-driven solutions that enhance trash prevention and improve the environment in communities. This MOU will help us convene key stakeholders from around the country to have focused discussions on the challenges and identify realistic, proven solutions. And we'll learn which solutions and approaches are most successful at the local level, hopefully being able to take those farther out into the rest of the United States to achieve results. So some of the more specific activities that will be going on is we'll be working with our Office of Research and Development in that program, a community in each EPA region. And in Region 5, we'll be working with Minneapolis-St. Paul, holding 3 or 4 workshops to talk about plastic pollution issues in the community, share some modeling results that are developed, and then information on plastics pollution fact sheets for the community. Another project we had was a grant that we funded to RTI International that was taking a look at the idea of a plastics recycling hub and what could be set up to help on a region basis, in a region that could be 400 or 500 miles in diameter, in radius, several hundred miles in radius, to be able to get plastics back to a particular area that would have the specialization needed to recycle these plastics and then get it ready to go into the next generation of products. They focused on Southeast Ohio, along the Ohio River. That region has a history with the chemical industry and associated infrastructures there that can be used to support plastics recycling. They took a look how different players can support each other to increase plastics recycling and opportunity, and interviewed a variety of stakeholders. They talked with local governments, manufacturers, universities and other educational institutions, waste haulers, and others to understand the ecosystem that could support plastics recycling. It was a first step for their projects towards plastics recycling in the area. And then they developed a roadmap of short and near-term and long-term activities that would support plastics recycling in a cluster in this area of Ohio that was also economically disadvantaged. So some of their next steps for this recycling industry cluster include conducting more detailed recycling infrastructure gap analysis for the region, integrating the plastics recycling industry cluster as part of their solid waste management plan updates that Ohio has, and then identify a coordinating organization. And then also EPA is doing some work on microplastics as a chemical of mutual concern. This is between a water quality agreement that the U.S. has with Canada focused on the Great Lakes. Stakeholders can nominate chemical substances for consideration, and then the two governments evaluate the nominations and determine if it meets the criteria of the binational treaty. So in August of 2023, stakeholders from the International Institute for Sustainable Development in Winnipeg and University of Toronto submitted a nomination for microplastics, and that will be evaluated by the program going through their process to evaluate nominations related to its toxicity, the extent that it's released in the Great Lakes area, how much is there, what kinds of exposures are significant to humans or wildlife, what the scale of it is in terms of releases, and then what the control and management solutions could potentially be. So those are our the main activities that we're working on to get us towards a circular economy, where we have very good connection between the raw materials and recycling by facilitating design, production, and remanufacturing, how materials are distributed, how consumers use things, if they reuse things, if they repair things, and then finally getting it back to collection facilities where it can be sorted and then recycled back into raw materials for the next cycle of products while minimizing waste. So I want to thank you all for your attention. We've got my contact information here, and then also we've got a QR code to our In the Loop newsletter that focuses on EPA's circular economy activities. We'll have our future announcements on any grant funding opportunities, as well as other activities of EPA on the circular economy topic, and some of our partners as well. So with that, I think we've still got a little bit of time before questions.
We do have a question in the room. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Yep, you can come right here if you'd like.
Yeah, the question I have is, I have a person who is a friend. He worked at Argonne. He was a industrial hygiene person, and he had a question. Your styrofoams, like the Dow styrofoam that they make, and and that as far as recycling, it's got a lot of air in it. It's very, if you try to, take it, like they live in Naperville, and there's a recycling place in Aurora, like a collection place, but there's not really a recycling of that type of thing, like in that area. And he was just wondering, about the recycling
Mhm.
that type of thing, you know, because it would be easier if you just had a recycling. He does stuff for the Lions,
Mhm.
and this one church collects this, and then they've offered to go and pick it up, but not on a full-time basis.
Mhm. Yeah, so I can't really comment specifically on the Naperville drop-off. I'm not familiar with that drop-off site, but what I have seen is a few things on, we'll call it expanded polystyrene. It turns out styrofoam's a trade name, and they never made products like in styrofoam was limited to building materials. So expanded polystyrene, which is the blocking that you see in consumer products that you may buy. It's in our food carry-out containers, and that there are some companies that have densifiers. Some densifiers may be mobile, and what they do is they work to densify the product to get that air out so that it is more cost-effective to transport. And then I've heard of some markets for those densified products. One example that I heard of a few years ago was picture frames. They can use that in that particular application for styrofoam, for expanded polystyrene. I'm not sure if it could go back into food containers in that, but there are some people that are working on that. I don't know if that helps answer your question, because I don't have too much detail on Naperville, but
So like what you're proposing won't address that particular material.
so no, those are two things that I've heard about being done with expanded polystyrene, is densifying it so that it's more cost effective to transport and easier to store, and then selling it into markets. Like there's a market for picture frames where that densified styrene is remolded into picture frames.
Okay. Okay, so like you said, there's not really an actual recycling in this area. Okay.
Yeah, that I can't speak to exactly who's doing it or isn't doing it in the area. That's just information that I know that is about what's being done with the material
Okay.
generally.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Are there any other questions?
You see one thing in the chat. Which is Julie's comment.
Email address. All right. Okay, well, Chris, I want to say thank you. And then Julie, also thank you again. Thank you guys so much for volunteering to talk with us for today. If there are no other questions or anything like that, I think we are good to break for lunch.
Oh,
I will fully close out the session and then I'll reopen it again for our afternoon session. So thank you all so much.
All right, thank you.
After lunch.
Yeah, thank you. And sign up for our newsletter. Get on our email list.
Thank you.
All
Thanks
right,
for
thank
having
you.
us.
Bye-bye.